Joining me now is my dear friend, Rachel Maddow. She's the host of The Rachel Maddow Show on MSNBC. And of course, her new podcast, Rachel Maddow Presents Ultra, which follows a remarkable, that somewhat forgotten seditious conspiracy trial undertaken by the Department of Justice against Nazi sympathizers at the close of the Second World War, a trial that did not have the same results as yesterday's. It's great to have you on, Rachel. Given that, we'll get into that trial, but given that it's not at all a sure thing, it was not a sure thing when these charges were brought, the significance, there's the legal significance, but also some broader, I think, symbolic significance of these convictions yesterday.
I absolutely think that's true. And I think, I mean, I don't know from direct experience, but I can surmise that the prosecution team at the Justice Department and the senior Justice Department officials who greenlit bringing seditious conspiracies like this in the past, that they were very worried that acquittals or mistrials or anything other than a failure to secure a conviction in a case like this, it doesn't just matter to those defendants. It matters to the movement that they represent. And if you take a swing at them like this and you miss, it can be very damaging. It can make them seem vindicated. It can fuel their organizing and their ability to recruit. It can energize their efforts. And so it's a sort of high risk, high reward thing.
Yes.
If you bring a seditious conspiracy charge and it fails, which is more often than not what happens, you can energize this movement that you're otherwise acting against. That said, if you bring a seditious conspiracy charge and it succeeds, as it has in the case of two of these Oath Keepers, you have, as you said, changed history, and you have clarified in an unimpeachable way that what happened in that incident, what happened on January 6th, was an effort to overturn the government by force, and that has been determined by the courts.
Let's talk about the 1944 trial that makes up a good portion of your incredible podcast, which everyone should listen to, and it's totally compelling and addictive, in which they weren't able to get that outcome despite, as we learned in your telling, like pretty good evidence that there were people conspiring with the actual Nazi government, actually seeking to aid and abet their aims in this country during World War II. Yeah.
I mean, it was the evidence against the Great Sedition case defendants in 1944 was stunning, including, I mean, one of the things that was alleged against them is that they were in a conspiracy with the Hitler government. And some of the evidence that emerges sort of late in the podcast that you hear about, is evidence from the Nazi side, from the Nazi files and from captured Nazi leaders who are like, yeah, we were working with those Americans. I mean, to have it confirmed in that way, it's mind-blowing. But yet those prosecutions were not successful. 4 years before that, in 1940, there was a seditious conspiracy prosecution brought against 17 members of a paramilitary fascist group called the Christian Front, where they had U.S. military heavy machine guns and were planning on shooting up armories. They had been making and stockpiling bombs and stolen U.S. military weapons. They were absolutely planning on doing what the government charged them with doing, but there wasn't a successful prosecution there either. It's just really hard to convict people of sedition. We have a First Amendment right to say and believe terrible things and to associate with whomever we choose to. There are strong constitutional protections that are in the way of these types of prosecutions for the good. Our Constitution protects us in that way. Sedition is also hard to prove because, by definition, we've talked about this before, if you're on trial for sedition, it means your effort to overthrow the government didn't work. Right. And so it can, in retrospect, look like it was not that serious or never a real risk of succeeding.
Well, and that I think is a really key part of all this, and I think a key part of understanding all this, because it is notable to me, the defense from the right very rarely has been like they were doing the right thing, right? It was basically these were goofballs, these were misfits, this was a mob, this was an accident. It didn't really amount to much, and it's striking how much that was the defense in the trials that you talk about, that really, is this really that big a thing, basically? And I think the contention of yourself and myself and, our shows is that, yeah, this was a very big thing. I think the American people have increasingly realized that, but there's something about the declaration here that establishes that, along with the committee's report coming, that seems to me important in that respect for history, if nothing else.
for history and for how this moment is remembered, right? So the right, as in those clips that you just showed in your open of members of Congress saying this was a normal tourist visit and they didn't do anything wrong and things just got a little bit out of hand. I mean, you can show those alongside people even further right on the ideological spectrum who are talking about January 6th as one of the greatest moments in U.S. history and very exciting and marvelous and fabulous. And that they can say whatever they want, but they ought to have a good fight with history in terms of the other side of that argument. And the other side of that argument, which is that January 6th was an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government by force, and that's bad. And it was a serious assault on us as a democracy, and that's bad. And anybody who was associated with that ought to be effectively excluded from any reach at political power ever again for the rest of their lives. I mean, you've got to fight that in history. And having a seditious conspiracy conviction in the Oath Keepers case. And remember, there's 2 more seditious conspiracy cases coming up. Proud Boys coming up next week. More Oath Keepers being brought up on the same charges December 19th. These convictions tell you in history what this was. And yeah, they'll try to contest it, but it's going to make it much harder for them to define this as something that was normal or laudable.
And that, of course, brings us to the person who was at the center of this conspiracy. And it wasn't, I mean, parts of it were conspiracy because it was behind closed doors. Parts of it was just very publicly saying, I want to stay in power against the will of the people, which is, of course, Donald Trump, who is, the subject of multiple criminal inquiries by the special counsel. We kind of know that confirmed by the attorney general now. And there's a strange thing, right? There's this mismatch because at some level it's like, what he did was sedition. What he did was treasonous. What he did was the greatest betrayal of the oath that I've probably seen in my life, certainly. But that doesn't necessarily square with like the case that you could make against him and make a conviction. And that really difficult call is really squarely placed before Smith, the special prosecutor, at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny. I printed out the cheat sheet on the verdict for the Oath Keepers defendants, right? And it's a grid because it's hard to keep track of how many of these defendants facing how many different charges and which ones were guilty and which ones weren't. 2 of the 5 defendants were found guilty of seditious conspiracy. 3 of them were found not guilty. All of them were found guilty of obstruction of an official proceeding. I mean, there's a mix of different ways that this can be approached legally. And even this one jury looking at this one bolus of evidence came to a very complex conclusion in terms of what these people are actually guilty of. That's important in terms of thinking that this is some sort of slam dunk. We'll see if that sort of matrix-like response from the jury holds for the next 2 seditious conspiracy trials too. But I think the other part of it, Chris, is that if they are going to bring seditious conspiracy or other serious felony charges against the former president for his role as the sort of center of the octopus that resulted in this assault on the government on January 6th, first of all, there's nothing to compare that to. That is a decision that is going to be a decision that is made independent of whatever happens to any paramilitary pro-Trump groups. But also, it will invoke a whole new level of Justice Department discipline and confidence, which is, can they stand up to the partisan hurricane that they will unleash as Republicans, the president, former president himself, but also Republicans up and down the country, train their fire, their proverbial fire on the Justice Department to get them to drop the case, to pressure the Justice Department. They'll threaten to defund the Justice Department. They'll attack individual prosecutors. The Justice Department in the past has not been great at resisting political pressure when people with political power are in the sights of prosecutors. And there are laudable moments, but they have caved to that pressure again and again, including in the sedition cases around World War II. And I hope that the Justice Department is conscious of that. I expect that they are, but I don't want anybody to be sort of namby-pamby about that history, because that history isn't a good one in terms of the Justice Department putting up a strong firewall for itself to protect its prosecutors from that kind of pressure.
If you want to learn more about those cases you just noted, the Rachel Maddow Presents Ultra is now available. You can scan the QR code on your screen to listen to all 8 episodes now, wherever you get your podcasts. It's phenomenal if you're driving, you're going for a walk with your dog, which is when I listen to it. Check it out. Rachel, thank you so much for making time on a Wednesday night. I appreciate it.